Hello and welcome to Down to Earth with Terry Virch, where we talk about what matters down here on planet Earth. Today, I am very honored to have Yannicka Merylo on the podcast. Yannicka is an advisor to Ukraine's Deputy Prime Minister for Digital Transformation. She's the former deputy mayor of Dnipro in Ukraine and a strong advocate of helping the Ukrainian war effort by fundraising for privately donated drones. And she's also helping to organize a campaign to bring World Expo 2030 to Odessa. Yannicka, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for inviting. It's an honor.
Where are you now?
Actually, right now I'm in Tallinn because I think that out from here, I can at this moment do even more than being somewhere in the basement, unfortunately, in Kyiv or Dnipro, because it's still quite a challenging time. Yeah. And I'm working on digital transformation. It means I can do everything through internet. And then again, it's easier even to fundraise, when you have a constant internet connection and phone connection. Right. And I'm the one who's out there. Yeah.
Right. But you're half Ukrainian.
My mother is Estonian, my father is Ukrainian. Right. So I spent all my summers in Ukraine and my winters in Estonia. And meanwhile, I had 3 languages, which means mother and me spoke Estonian, me and father Ukrainian only, and mother and father Russian. So I'm quite a mix.
And 4 languages, because your English is perfect also.
Thank you. And I lived for 5 years in Finland and so on. But yeah, life is twisted.
I lived in Finland, in Imatra.
Oh God! I hope you enjoyed it.
Oh, I loved it. I was a kid. It was a high school exchange program. I was right on the Soviet border. We could look at our house on a lake, and there was a line in the lake, and on the other side of the lake there were guard towers. It was 1984, ironically. So I grew up like watching the Soviet Union. It was pretty cool.
So, making a political joke, maybe Karelia will do a referendum again to rejoin Finland also.
To make Finland great again. So Karelia, for those who most people don't know the intricacies of Finland. It was Finland, and then the Soviet Union, Vezhlivi Ljudi, they came to help Finland, and suddenly Finland is a lot smaller than it used to be. it was Karelia. Vibori was the town. Vyborg, yeah. It was Finnish and now it's Russian. So we should have a referendum there. I think a lot of people might enjoy the Finnish standard of living and freedom rather than the Russian standard of living and freedom.
So might Kaliningrad, yes.
Kaliningrad, yeah, that was Königsberg, right? There's the 3 Baltic countries and Kaliningrad, which is this weird like part of Russia that's not attached to Russia. Most people don't know about that.
Yes, it's the history moves in strange ways. Yes.
Yeah. I've been very impressed with the Baltics and Poland and Ukraine, of course, like the attitude towards freedom and democracy that you have is different than what a lot of the Western European folks have, or people who live in North America, who the last war we had here was several centuries ago. So your attitude towards this is different than ours, and I really admire that.
Well, I think it's historic memory that unfortunately, Estonia does have this historic memory about previous Russia, Soviet Union, because Estonia became basically independent country in 1918, the first Estonian Republic, when it was occupied by basically the Soviet Union 20 years later. So actually we have this historic memory of being occupied by any form of Russia, whether it's empire, whether it's Soviet Union, so does Lithuania, so does basically have Poland its own history. Yeah. And it was quite interesting that Estonian Prime Minister Kaja Kallas, she was all the time preaching basically that listen to us because you're far away. Sorry, you don't have like any personal memories or history or knowledge about that. Yeah. And everyone was like, oh, you're warmongering. And now she received the prize from Politico for being Cassiopeia, meaning that preaching the omens that no one listens. And now they're saying that, oh, yes, we should have listened to Baltic countries and Poland because you do have this memory.
I love that story. You know, we at NASA, we've had two really bad shuttle accidents. And in both cases, there were engineers saying, we're going to have this problem, we're going to have this problem. And the senior managers ignored them. It's kind of the same thing. There are people that knew, but the big boss, Germany wasn't listening, America wasn't listening. And here we are. There's a book, I just read it. My daughter gave it to me. It's called Between Shades of Gray by, oh my gosh, it's a lady that's a best-selling author, Ruda. It's about the Soviet occupation of Lithuania.
Mm-hmm.
It was horrendous. They
Mm-hmm.
took thousands of people to the gulags and it was absolutely terrible. And then when they finally came back in the 1950s and 60s, they couldn't say anything because it was the Soviet Union. They weren't allowed to tell this story. And I went to actually Magadan, which is a town in the Dalny Vostok in the Far East, and to visit a friend who has a Canadian company. They were running a mining operation there. It was really cool to see how they do mining. But that was where, when I tell my Russian friends that I'm going to Magadan, they all kind of laugh. That's where Stalin had his gulags and committed the worst atrocities of some of the worst of World War II. It was terrible. But it's a story that I didn't know about until I read this book about how the Baltics suffered under Russia. And it really explains a lot. I wish we in the West could understand that story because it's really important.
For example, in Estonia, after Estonia was actually 20 years successfully free, and Russia or Soviet Union occupied Estonia, then there were huge like repressions, which means that tens of thousands of people were sent to Siberia. The families separated, children dying. Then in Ukraine, there was a huge starvation, and starvation that is now called genocide, Holodomor.
Holodomor, yeah.
Yes, and now it's again the same history repeating, basically, that
Yeah.
Russia deporting people from Lugansk, Donetsk, Mariupol to Russia, again to all these areas, to Siberia, the children, that are
Yeah.
thousands of children being taken away. So it's so carefully repeating, yeah.
It's not rocket science. I mean, there's a movie. Have you seen the movie called Mr. Jones? It came out a few years ago. It's
Yes,
about the Holodomor. It's a great movie. Basically,
yes.
this British reporter, and in the 1930s, there were lots of communists in Western Europe, and they loved the Soviet Union, and they really admired Stalin. And so he goes on this trip, and he finds all these starving people in Ukraine, and basically he says, "Hey, things aren't like we think in the Soviet Union." And the when you look at you can go back to Napoleon and centuries ago, and that's one thing. But the history we're talking about is pretty recent. It's within the last century. And when you look at World War II, we're taught in America like the Soviets were on our side and we both helped to fight the Germans. Well, the Soviets had a pact with Hitler. And when we learned that World War II started when Hitler attacked Poland. Well, Stalin also attacked Poland at the same time, and they divided it up. And then they had the Katyn massacre where he killed tens of thousands of the Polish top intellectuals, the generals, the officers, and just ended Poland's ability to resist through this horrendous massacre. We don't know any of that. So it's, yeah.
So we didn't know any of that during Soviet occupation, basically. You're referring to Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact,
Yeah.
where basically Germany and Soviet Union divided the Europe,
Europe.
that
Yeah.
what parts of who gets Baltics, who gets Poland,
Yeah.
and so on. So yes, and I'm actually quite, let's say, happy. It might be the wrong word, but let's say happy that Germany decided to be in the right side of the history this time by now.
How painful was that though?
Yes, but I think it might have been painful for them as well to go through this whole transition, through still
Yeah.
remembering that side of history and
Yeah.
now transforming themselves into giving leopards and
Yeah.
giving again the tanks, but now to the right side of the history.
Well, to be fair, Germany has given a lot of assistance. And what the word that Olaf Schultz, I'm bad in German. It's Zeitung Welde. They're basically times are changing. Um, and they're recognizing that, and their former prime minister was chairman of the board of Nord Stream 2. I mean, the corruption, and I hate the word they use, treason, but Gerhard Schroeder is a Russian agent. He was the prime minister of Germany. It's insane the level of attachment to Russia that Germany had, and my German friends are very upset about it. And I'm really hopeful that Germany has really done that Zeitunwende, that has really turned the corner, because I don't think Putin wants to stop at Ukraine. He has much bigger designs for Moldova. Who knows where? Make Karelia bigger again. I don't know what his future designs are, but
Well, I would guess the Russian Empire again,
yeah,
because if you remember the history and empire, then it's at least Baltics, Georgia, maybe Kazakhstan, Moldova. Yes. So actually, he will stop where he will be stopped.
I love that. Putin will stop when he is stopped. That is a great way to put it. And you hear from some of our Western European friends about we need to negotiate, and a lot of the Republicans in America are, why are we wasting money? Marjorie Taylor Greene has been a big anti-Ukraine Russian agent. This is a military problem, and it requires a military solution. I hope we're not dumb enough to be duped by Putin. We were in Chechnya, we were in Georgia, we were in 2014, we were in Syria. We let him do what he did in Syria just so we could get our attacks. It just happens over and over. And I hope our eyes are open to, we need to stop him now.
Well, I think that we have part of the blame, because basically we didn't act when we saw it. As you mentioned, all this before the conflicts, also the Georgia, the Azerbaijan, and so on.
Yeah.
We should have
Azerbaijan, Armenia.
that.
Yeah.
Yes, because it's like he saw that there are no consequences, basically.
Yeah.
That, okay, no sanctions, I can go further and further. And I think it's very important for our listeners also to know about the Budapest Memorandum, which means that after the Soviet Union collapsed, the Russia, Ukraine, US, UK, later France and China, signed the memorandum where basically Ukraine gave over our nuclear arsenal, which was basically the third in the world, to Russia, and also destroyed part of the nuclear weapons, because it was like agreement that everyone will respect Ukrainian territorial integrity, that will be the guarantees of Ukrainian integrity. And basically now one of the countries who has signed the agreement is attacking with the same weapons, even sometimes, Ukraine. And again, US signed it, UK signed it. It was a promise signed. So talking about the Greens and your representatives, I hope that the promises given by US mean something as well.
Yeah. I don't know if you follow me on Twitter. I've been promoting since February 25th. We said, Ukraine, if you give up your nuclear weapons, we will defend your territorial integrity. Russia said they would, but the US and UK signed that memorandum during the Clinton administration. Maybe it's not as strong as NATO, but it was a security guarantee. And for nuclear security, that was really valuable. Like, we got something very important and valuable to us when Ukraine gave up those nuclear missiles. During the 90s was not a good time, right? There was a lot of confusion, who's in charge, there's oligarch. It was bad. It was terrible for Ukraine and Russia and the whole former Soviet Union. So we got something very valuable, and now it's time for us to live up to the agreement that we signed. If we don't, and I think we are, but if we don't, then who's ever going to believe us in the future? In 2030, when we need to sign an agreement with some country, why would they believe us if we don't do this for Ukraine now?
Yes, and one more nuance, that basically when US is investing its defense in democracy and so on, Russia is still regarded as one of the, let's say, potential enemies or potential threats, let's put it this way.
Yeah.
So, which means that if you help Ukraine to neutralize the threat, it's also less investments in US defense budget, potentially.
This is the best investment we've ever had. What is it? 100 billion, 100 and some billion dollars. It's a small fraction of 1 year of our budget to really Ukrainians are paying with blood. We're paying with dollars. It's a no-brainer. I hate, you don't want to look at this as a economic return on investment, but America is getting a very good return on our investment in Ukraine. And Ukrainians are the only people actually fighting for democracy today that I know of. Maybe there's some small country somewhere, but Ukraine is actually fighting. And I want to talk about what it's like there. So you're going back and forth between Estonia and Ukraine, but life sucks. And we keep on, it's just, it's a intellectual thing here in America. We don't know what it's like. Russian launched missiles, the electricity went out, it killed 10 civilians. That's just news that doesn't mean anything. But there's this whole massive country, and Ukraine is big, right? It's bigger than, it's like Texas, or it's a really big physical country. And there's tens of millions of people that don't know if they're going to have electricity, don't know if they're going to have heat, don't know if they're going to die that night when they go to bed, night after night after night after night. I just can't imagine the psychological stress for tens of millions of people. And every Ukrainian, I'm sure, knows somebody who was killed or something like that,
Yes, but if you imagine basically that you have air alarms or raids on a daily basis, it could last for hours, and means that you have to go to basement. When you pack your kid to the school, you pack him some food and some, I don't know, nightgowns so that they could spend a night if needed in the kindergarten or in the school, or
Wow.
their night might be in the middle of the school day, basically. And, they have even painted these basements in the kindergarten, so it would be happier to be in a shelter. Can you imagine that? So basically, there are children who are really like growing up under the real bombings, because it's quite a daily thing that you can see the rocket, hear the drone. It's absolutely amazing sound of the air raid. When you hear it for hours, for months,
Yeah.
it's true psychological damage, even if you're not hit. It's very like on a daily basis disturbing in the very deep level. And as you said, everyone knows someone. Imagine the winter without heat. It could be for hours, it could be for weeks. You never know. When you have the electricity, then you use your 7 minutes to wash basically your clothes. It's like living in extreme conditions very often.
For a year. I mean, it's not, everybody can do that for a week, but it's been a year, and it's everywhere, right? It's not, if you live in Kherson or Mykolaiv, or or Donetsk, of course you're on the front line. But if you're in Kiev or Odessa or Lviv, which are hundreds of kilometers away, the Russians still attack there.
Yes, and Odessa, my friend showed me just a few days ago, basically a video from his window, which was like fireworks. Basically, there were rockets and there was air defense, hitting them down.
Yeah.
It was like you've seen in Israel, probably,
Yeah.
the dome.
Yeah.
Basically, out of your window, it's like constant fireworks.
Yeah.
Besides it's not fireworks, it's real rockets flying at you.
The day the war started, I was advocating that we need to send Patriots, we need to send ATACMs, and we need to send tanks, and we need to send F-16s. And it's taken so long to get those. And the one of all those things, Patriots are no-brainers. Like, there's this fear, oh, we don't want to escalate with Russia. Well, Russia's attacking Europe and committing genocide and war crimes, and we don't want to give Ukraine Patriots. I don't think there are Patriots there yet. Are the missiles actually in country? It's been a
No,
year.
Mhm.
Thousands of Ukrainian citizens have been killed that could have been saved had we given these Patriots. And why are they in West Germany? Like, Russia's not bombing West Germany, they're bombing Ukraine. That's where they should be. I get very, very frustrated when I see this fear. You can't live your life afraid of the bully, or you'll get bullied.
Absolutely. And basically, this is a mentality of Putin.
Yeah.
He is like very, let's say, basic gang mentality,
Yeah.
that as long as no one stands up, you can
Yeah.
bully and you continue bullying. And
Yeah.
he hates weakness and he doesn't respect weakness,
Yeah.
which means all those phone calls that were made and all these discussions. It's just pathetic. He doesn't even respect that. He respects only strengths,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
I can see very clearly. Now, look, we shouldn't send tanks to Moscow. That's a bad idea, but we're not going to. And so the other thing that I hate is that, imagine if America were attacked constantly for a year, if Canada or Mexico were bombing Phoenix and Chicago and Indianapolis for a year and killing civil, but we weren't allowed to fight back.
Mhm.
And that's the condition that we've given Ukraine. Like, we'll give you these weapons, but you're not allowed. You can use them in your territory, but you can't fight back. In Vietnam, the president restricted our own military. We weren't allowed to bomb certain targets. And so they could just take off their MiG fighters for years and shoot our guys down because we weren't allowed to bomb them on their airfield. And these kind of restrictions just lead to deaths. There's a lot of dead Ukrainians because we have this weakness and fear, I think.
Yes, and the weakness continues in regards to maybe you could consider giving up part of your territory. It's like, should you give away Alaska
Yeah.
or
Or
US?
Florida, or right.
Yes. How can you even like imply or hint that you should give away your territory? Why don't you give your territory? It
Yeah.
doesn't work like that,
Yeah.
basically. It's either everything or nothing, because again, you cannot give up to bully. Otherwise, it will be coming for more and more.
Yeah. But I think Ukrainians have taught the world a lesson, because there was this kind of entrenched, it's a moral decay and rot. Like, we really had that in the West. And I think a lot of people's eyes have been opened because of the bravery of Ukraine. And we've given a lot of support. There's no doubt about that. But a lot of the support, like the Europeans gave Ukraine a lot of their old stuff. Like, you got the air defense systems from the 1970s and 80s. You're getting the really old tanks and APCs, which is, it's good, it's helping, but we're still not giving you the best stuff, which really makes me mad.
Yes, and the delay is so bad, really, meaning that we understand that we will get to that. And it's like basically now we do months of Leopard trainings, and so
Right.
not still out there. Germany made a promise, but until they're rolling in the fields of Ukraine, it will
Right.
again take months. Now we're discussing the fighter jets and
Yeah.
16s. We're discussing, then it takes training, then it takes getting
It
them
takes a
there.
few months to get good at an F-16. You should have had 20 pilots in America a year ago. They would be bombing Russians today had we done that, but we didn't. And the delay is an intellectual exercise for us in America, and it's people dying in Ukraine. Like, the delay is really not good. So
Yes, and it's always that we try to patch the wound instead of surgery, meaning that now we're discussing that we should send humanitarian aid, we should help refugees. Please help us to stop the war. Then we will not have refugees. Then you don't need to
yeah.
support refugees. Then we don't need the humanitarian support.
Right.
Let's deal with the reason, not the consequence.
Right. And I really don't like it when some politicians say, we'll support Ukraine for as long as it takes. We should support Ukraine for as short as it takes. Like, we need to end this as quickly as possible. It'll be better for Russia, actually. Russia would be much better off if we just ended this war. The average Russian person, it probably wouldn't be good for Putin's career. But who cares? Like, it would be better for everybody to end the war. Yeah.
Yeah, so we're way past this saving face stage. I hope even the French.
Was the goal in 1943 to make sure that Hitler saved face, and we want to make sure that Germany has a seat at the table, and we have to provide for Germany? No.
And German tourists will be cruising US and Europe. And
I've been traveling for the last couple of weeks, and at the airport here, there was a Russian talking on the phone in Russian. He probably didn't expect that the guy next to him could understand what he was saying. But yeah, when the mobilization happened, this was a big traumatic thing, because the Russian mentality, and I love my time in Russia. I love flying in space with the Russians. I love my next door neighbor is Russian. I had Olivier for New Year's. There's a lot about Russia that I love. But the culture is so really, really profoundly bad in that they just accept living under a dictator. For them, there's nothing they can do. They don't like it, but they can't change anything. And they don't, it's not really their place to say that this. Putin can decide that's his job. My job is just to be quiet and not say anything. And when you have that cultural mentality, you end up with the Soviet Union.
Absolutely.
You end up with Putin. Russia has been probably the largest source of misery on earth. Russia is responsible for more human misery than anything. They arm all the dictators in Africa. They arm all the dictators in the Middle East. Millions of people die because of the Russian arming. You see what they're doing in Ukraine right now. You see how life was in Estonia and Lithuania for 50 years under the Soviet boot. Like that culture where it's, I'll just accept it. Like they're willing to live as slaves. Americans would never accept that in a million years. If hopefully, I hope anyway, we demand freedom. The Baltics, Poland, these countries want freedom. They don't want this stuff. But that cultural thing, it's not just a cultural thing, it affects the rest of the world. Ukraine is dealing with this because of the Russians' willingness to live as slaves under a dictator.
Yeah, but it's this classical Russian, we can outsuffer anyone mentality.
Yeah.
Meaning that you don't even like expect the life to be better. That it's always been like that. We still remember the
They're
Soviet
proud
times.
of it. Leningrad and Stalingrad.
Exactly. And it's like this, the Tsar knows what he's doing. We shouldn't pose questions to Tsar. We're just little people. If we have to suffer, it's for some bigger cause. We don't quite understand it, but we're sure Tsar knows what it is.
Yeah.
So it's extremely this out-suffering mentality, which Ukrainians are very much different. It's as you know about the Maidans, the Orange Revolutions. Every time there was even a small sign of dictatorship being born, Ukraine stood up, and it stood for months and months under the freezing cold with snipers killing over 100 of Ukrainians in like 2013.
Describe Maidan, the 2013-14. That's really that's the cause of this. Putin got his feelings hurt because the Ukrainian people, got rid of his dictator and said, we don't want you. And that really, he's an egotistical maniac. And anyway, can you describe we've heard Orange Revolution, that was 2004, I think. And just describe what happened there.
Yeah, 10 years later, basically, there was a President Yanukovych, which was quite pro-Russian president, and had even like defense minister from Russia, and then it was like Russia was very integrated everywhere in defense, in economy, and so on. So, but still, Yanukovych promised that I'll give you Europe. There will be European integration and so on. But one evening he flew back from basically Russia and then from negotiations and said, okay, we will not go to Europe. We will still like accept this Russian aid package and so on. So there was one journalist who basically called out that, okay, that's enough. Take your teas and your warm coats and let's meet in Maidan under the statue. And no one really expected that it will turn into this huge revolution. But the students gathered and they were protesting that Yanukovych was turning back from European integration. And but then basically the Ukrainian forces forced the students out of this square, which means violently forced out.
Yeah, they got killed, right?
Then they got beaten and few killed. But when people actually saw it in the morning that their children are being beaten, then it was like, it's enough. We lived with corruption. We lived with pro-Russian president, but you cannot kill and beat up our children. So basically the hundreds of thousands of people stood up and said, that's enough. We want this regime to go. And, you know, there was even like US and UK and our partner who was saying, oh, can you make a compromise? Maybe the elections like later on. And Ukrainians were, no, we're going to stand here and we're going to gather. But it was like million was the most gathered in the square and saying that we will stand here as long as it takes. Yes, it's minus degrees in Kiev. Yes. Yeah. From all over the Ukraine, they gathered to Kiev and even in Kharkiv, right? Like Russia bordering city and everywhere. So basically it ended with Yanukovych escaping to Russia, the pro-Russian president, and with new president being elected, and basically the reform started really in 15.
Yeah. I found I don't have it in front of me. I read this long thread on Twitter today. It was a Ukrainian. He was an intellectual professor. Then he worked in the economy minister. And anyway, he talked about the process of doing away with corruption, because I wasn't a Ukraine expert. I spent a lot of time in Russia to fly in space. And the thing I knew about Ukraine is that everybody had somebody from Ukraine. Russians love Kiev. It's this beautiful European city. Their cousins from Ukraine. A lot of Ukrainians have relatives in Russia. It's an amazingly connected. It was an amazingly connected society, but there was always corruption. So everybody was like, there's this, you have to be careful in Ukraine because of corruption. So this guy on Twitter went through the process of what you've been doing since 2014. And it sounds pretty amazing. I mean, even the American president was contributing to corruption by saying, hey, investigate my political enemy and I'll give you this aid. It's like the definition of corruption. I'm talking about the last president. But Ukraine has really made, I think, a lot of progress in this area. In fact, Zelensky just fired a few guys, and some on the right here in America are saying, see, Ukraine's corrupt. And what I think is, see, Ukraine is dealing with corruption and getting rid of it. I think. Do you see that also? I mean, you've been in government there.
I absolutely agree. And basically, I've been always this young reformer and trying to create this digital system to fight the corruption, because if there is no human interaction, there is less corruption, basically. Right. So I had my little red flags basically also out and saying, okay, if this happens, I can say that, yes, the fight with corruption has really started. So actually, I think based on these latest firings and so on, I do think that the fight with corruption has started. But what is important, that it's not the president fighting the corruption, is still that we managed to create these different agencies that should be fighting the corruption, which means it's still like the law and legislation that works, and the institutions. It's not like president says, he's good, he's bad, he's corrupt, he's not. It's like we managed to create the institution that started working. Yes, I very much hope so.
That the strength of having institutions is so important. And America has pretty good institutions. It withstood an attack, a really significant attack on our presidential election, because we have good institutions. I'm from Baltimore, this city in America, and it's incredibly corrupt. The mayor goes to jail all the time. And we had a mayor a couple years ago that she wrote a children's book, and like somebody bought 100,000 copies of her children's book. And anyway, so, corruption happens everywhere. You need you need judges that are well paid, so they don't need to be taking bribes. You need, police chiefs, you need mayors, you need people who are buying weapons, not taking bribes to pay more for food, as you just heard in Ukraine. And it feels like because of this 2014 Maidan revolution, Ukraine has made, I'm sure there's more progress to go, but you have made progress.
Yes, and I think that even this kind of things like the digital different solution has helped, because, for example, now all the procurements, the public procurements have to be done through this e-procurement system, which means that everything that was sold somewhere in the, I don't know, in the offices and so on, are open now, which means you can see all the bids for government contracts. You can see the conditions, the prices. There are more participants. There is less like this darker side from all of it. So basically, there's so many like steps taken. It's not just fighting, but it's like making the processes more transparent and cutting the human factor and automatizing what we can.
Yannick, I do some guest lecturing at Harvard Business School, and I was there yesterday, and one of the guys in my small group runs a company that does bank auditing software. So his software helps banks make sure money's going where I should connect you to. It sounds like what you're doing is exactly what his company does here in the States.
We'll be happy to.
Yeah. So how is the war going from your perspective? It's hard we've talked a little bit about what it's like in Ukraine. I don't know. What are your thoughts? How's the war going?
It's like you celebrate this kind of Leopard decision like it was your best birthday. Yeah. So I would say that we already again crossed one red line, which was extremely important. And I think it was the hardest last summer when we didn't really understand whether the world will really step in or not. Because, yes, as President Zelensky said, 1,000 tanks are not 1,000 tanks or 100 tanks,
Okay,
which means
before you go on, what are your favorite Zelensky quotes? That's one of the questions I wanted to ask you. So, 1,000 thanks or not 1,000 tanks is maybe that's on the Mount Rushmore of good quotes.
I think it was probably 100 tanks, but still it doesn't change the meaning. But no, my favorite Zelensky quote is definitely I need an armor, not a ride, because it's changed the course of the history also.
That's my favorite one. Because in the West, we're afraid and you're going to lose and let us save you from the bad Russians. And he's like, no, give me some weapons and we'll fight. There's a saying in Russia, Lucha sto druziej, chem sto rublей, Lucha sto tankov, chem sto whatever. Yeah. That
Yes.
better to have 100 friends than 100 rubles is their expression.
Absolutely. So last summer, as I was saying, it was hard because we didn't understand how much our allies and partners are ready to deliver, really, besides the strong words of support.
Yeah.
So it was even, the jokes that when Zelensky was asking for support, then it was a picture that Ukrainians are like, oh, we need support. And then the American jet flying over, we support you, waving, So we needed the jet to be flying, not the like waving from the jet. But anyways, jokes aside, now we understand that it's impossible to lose when really the world is ready to invest by its newest weapons. I hope, as you mentioned, data comes and so on. We still need the long-range missiles. We still need much more air defense. So we still need these jets, but we can see it coming. Yeah. Which means that we understand that in a few months they will be here, and we know they will be here. So I think it's extremely big mental support also, knowing that the world is ready to raise the stakes, basically, and that the bullying doesn't work anymore. And even Macron is not saying about the saving the Putin's face and not making those long calls, but understanding that it's quite black and white at this point. Yeah. So I think that it might be still a one or two big offensives from Russian side. But we understand that still with all these new weapons coming, starting from Bradleys, thank you for those also, ending up with jets,
I'm a fighter pilot. I'm a F-16 pilot. So to me, tanks are targets. I'd rather have the jets.
But this is exactly why you need jets as well.
Yes.
Air support, air support for tanks as well.
Yeah. And the thing that F-16s can do is they can launch modern weapon. You don't want to fly F-16s in Russian air defenses. Those Russian S-300s are really good, and you just don't want to fly F-16s around there. But you can launch certain weapons from a distance. HIMARS and you need to have ATACMS. If something happened at a Russian airbase a couple months ago, and I don't know what happened. Ukraine didn't claim what happened, but they had to move their bombers to Murmansk. I think that's a big problem for them, but they're still able to do it. They're still launching these missiles there. But having a better air, America hasn't fought a war without air dominance for a century. I mean, you have to have air dominance, and I hope we continue to improve our amount of support.
Yeah, but talking about Ukraine and Russia being like, let's say, I don't know, integrated or very much related, then you probably know also about Ukrainian space, because part of their Soviet Union space industry was in Ukraine and yes,
where you were.
Yes, we were very much fighting also for this private space, meaning that Ukraine had a huge heritage with very many rocket carriers built actually in Ukraine, not in Russia somewhere. And now I hope also in Ukraine the private space will be born based on this heritage.
Well, that's a great point. So I like talking about the details of the military war, but there's going to be after the war, there's going to be reconstruction. There's going to be a huge amount of work. After World War II, the American economy boomed. And I think after this war, the Ukrainian economy is going to boom. One of the interesting differences between the Russian army and the Ukrainian army, I think, in your army, you have the best. Like you have college professors and engineers and shop owners are now your sergeants in the army. Whereas all of those people in Russia went to Turkey or went to Uzbekistan to avoid it. So they're getting their murderers in the Wagner group. And because Ukraine it's hard to learn how to operate complicated weapon systems. And you guys are doing it amazingly quickly. So you have all these men that are like the top of your society running your army versus Russia, which has the bottom of their society getting just shot to death. But after the war, you're going to have all these guys come back. They're going to want to have families. They're going to want to rebuild. They're going to want to build the economy. So I think your future looks really bright post-war.
Yes, talking about the bright guys in army, this is why they call it MacGyver army.
Oh my God, you know that in Ukraine. That's funny.
We take the most out and the best out of everything we can, basically. Yeah. And the level of invention, it's amazing, yes. But I think this is the difference between Russia and Ukraine as well, that Russia will be doomed for tens of years, not depending on whether the war will end this year or next year. The economy is just nosediving. It is just the beginning, basically. And the sanctions will be there for a long time, which means that no more gas to Europe. Everyone has replaced Russian energy. But anyways, Ukraine, it will be the new promised land, meaning that the investments will definitely flow in. Right. I very much believe that not everyone, but many countries want to be part of this rebuilding. And for example, one of the projects, I think it's amazing, would be that if Ukraine would be hosting in 2030,
the World. Talk about that.
Yes, because it's one of the rebuilding projects and huge that Ukraine is one of the 4 finalists to host this World Expo. And as you imagine, it's like the worldwide demand. And every time the huge infrastructure investments are made, which means the new airports and railway and the hotels and the economy. And now Ukraine, Odessa is one of the finalists next to Busan, South Korea, El Riyadh, and Rome. Moscow was the 5th finalist, but I know what happened. So now one more year to hope that governments will support so that Ukraine will be basically rebuilding and showing it off to the world in 2030. And there are many of these kind of projects, which means that there is there is a very strong and good future. It's just a matter of time, whether this rebuilding will start.
It's just a matter of beating the Russians as soon as possible.
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Coming back to the budgets, yes.
Ukraine just won Eurovision.
Yes, but now it's being held in UK. But it's very good, meaning that if Ukraine cannot make it, UK is our great friend and ally, and they basically dedicated to Ukraine, saying that, guys, it's for you.
Should Boris Johnson be the British ambassador there in Ukraine?
Oh, Boris Johnson is very loved in Ukraine because Boris Johnson even had, this Instagram nickname, Boris Johnson UK, which is in Ukrainian way pronounced Johnsonuk, which is completely Ukrainian family name. So Ukrainians adopted Boris Johnson already.
Uke, yeah.
Like Johnsonuk.
Yeah.
UK, but like Ukrainian surname.
Right. That is funny. I didn't think about that.
Yes. So he's already Ukrainian.
My British friends really do not like him for a lot of internal political things. I like him. Like he was one of the few leaders in the world that saw clearly the threat. He called it Putin's barbaric invasion. He saw the threat. A lot of other politicians were afraid. They were working for their own political benefits. But Johnson, like Winston Churchill, for whatever faults he had, he's like, we need to beat the Nazis. And at a time when half of the UK and a half of America didn't think we needed to beat the Nazis, half of them didn't. We did not want to get involved in the war. It's someone else's problem. Let's not do it. That was the strong American attitude until they bombed Pearl Harbor, and then we got in the war. But This happens whenever dictators rise up to attack another country. Most people are afraid. Most people don't want to get involved. Most people, and you need a strong leader like Boris Johnson, like Volodymyr Zelensky. If you had, imagine if Lukashenko was in charge, or the previous year 20, I forgot his name, Yanukovych. Yeah. What would have happened with the wrong leader? So guys like Zelensky, or the prime minister there in Estonia, she would not try and hide. She would fight, obviously.
I think this is a case of a role of a leader in history, basically.
Yeah.
That Zelensky has this very unique part to play, and he has been amazing, meaning the true leadership. That day when he actually said that I need an arm, not a right, he didn't say it like for interview. It was leaked later for newspapers. He just made a video that, yes, we're here. I'm here. My government is here.
Yeah.
We're with. And
he walked around Kiev doing a selfie video. Hey, look, here we are, and here's the background. And yeah, that was so powerful.
Yes, and he's been constantly like delivering, which means he extremely well, I think, feels the different countries and the spirit of the nation, and can address it in very simple words, because so many quotes from him have become a legend and have inspired so many people. When people are sitting without electricity and some interviewer is coming and is, oh, how are you doing without electricity? And then the people are quoting president like, better without electricity, but without you, quoting to Russia. That we can, that it doesn't matter, we can stand the hunger, we can stand the darkness, but without you, without Russia. So basically he's been inspiring all the way.
Imagine, I'm trying to paint a picture for the listeners who don't live in Kharkiv. Imagine if your neighbor launched missiles to kill civilians and take out your electricity for months and months and months, and you were not allowed to fight back. You weren't allowed to attack them back. Imagine how that would feel when your neighbor got killed and your kid wakes up screaming. You have to send pajamas with your first grader, with your 6-year-old to school in case he gets stuck. Imagine doing that and then not being allowed to fight back.
Yes, and there are over 80,000 war crimes, over 80,000, which means, if I will put a very simple allegory, it is like basically your neighbor walks into your apartment, rapes part of your family, sorry, but this is what is happening,
That's kills what happened.
Yes, and claims this apartment is now his. And when you say, no, I want you charged and out of your apartment, then he's saying like, okay, you can live in the kitchen and let's call it a peace. This is what Russia is doing, that we will keep part of the territories, we will get away with without any trials and so on, and it should be good. It's basically the atrocities that and the war crimes that have happened. The scope is just heartbreaking.
I have faith that justice will be done. Slobodan Milosevic, the Serbian leaders in the 90s were committing genocide. That was my job in Germany. Our fighters supported the Bosnians and the Kosovars. It took time, but a lot of those guys ended up in jail at war crimes. The Germans just arrested a 97-year-old Nazi, a secretary at the camp, and so the justice will happen. The problem is, I don't know if this is your area of expertise. America and a lot of countries, I think Russia, a lot of them are not in the International Criminal Court. We didn't sign up for that. So there's going to have to be some kind of, I think there's going to have to be like a special prosecutor. There's going to have to be a unique system. I'm not a lawyer. I don't really know, but there needs to be some international mechanism. Do you know what's going on for that to hold the Russians accountable?
They're establishing now a new tribunal because they understood basically in EU and in Hague level that current tribunals cannot prosecute for these crimes. So the new tribunal will be established. But then again, if you remember very well the Mossad case and so on, I'm afraid that if Russia will not be giving up those criminals, if Russia will not be also participating in these trials, it is very hard to get them out from Russia, basically. So the Russia has to change and say, okay, everyone will be charged, everyone responsible, we give it over, and just fair courts.
Yeah, and some of the Serbs even were, people are tried in absentia, so the trial happens even though they're not there. If Putin, he's not going to live forever, and so when the next guy comes, maybe there will be some reasonable democratic person that wants to move forward, but I don't know. I hope we can't just say let's end the war and forget about what happened. You have to remember what happened. There has to be justice. In addition to leaving Ukraine, there has to be some justice, I think.
Yes, and this is why President Zelensky is saying that we need all of our territories back to previous borders. We need the trials, and we need the war reparations.
Yeah.
Because again, the huge damage has been done. It's measurable in almost $1 trillion already.
Yeah. It's lots of billions for sure.
Yes, very lots of billions, because it's like infrastructure and the roads and the railways and the airports. And
one of the things that I've noticed that in my career, I was based in Germany, I was based in Korea, I've been to Japan, all around the world. It sounds weird, but the countries that we defeated in war were rebuilt very modern. Like Germany is a very modern country. Japan, South Korea, they're very modern. In some weird way, I think in 2030, I think Ukraine is going to be a lot more modern country. In 2040, it's going to be a much more modern country than it was in 2010. You certainly don't want to go through this at all, but you're going to rebuild in a way that you've been to Warsaw, to Warsaw in Poland.
Yes, of course.
It's such a modern city, and they rebuilt it kind of in the old style, but they're all new buildings because the Soviets and the Germans just flattened it. They destroyed everything. The same way what they're doing in Ukraine today is what they did in 1944, 45. But it's modern. It's like they rebuilt it new. So you don't want to have to go through this, but I think that means that the future is bright for Ukraine because of the rebuilding that's going to happen in the next decade or two.
I absolutely agree. And there are some cities there, nothing is left from the city, like Mariupol and smaller cities. And it just has to be rebuilt from zero, basically, almost. So I agree with you that in 100 years, it will be a very different Ukraine that it would be without the war, unfortunately, yes.
One of my early F-16 bases was Homestead. It's in Miami. And in 1992, this giant hurricane came called Andrew. It was the biggest ever hurricane to hit America. It was terrible. And it completely destroyed Homestead and Florida City. And they were small, they were dirty, they were poor, drugs. They were not nice places. You did not want to live there, except for that's where the Air Force Base was. And now they're very modern. Like they built a NASCAR site. And so sometimes post-destruction, if you see a forest after a fire, it's green, it comes to life. And so I think that's one thing for Ukrainians to look forward to, is that it's going to take time, and we need to make that time as short as possible, but I think things can get better.
Yes, because for example, even this World Expo 2030, for example, it will be huge project, and the architects Zaha Hadid, which is one of the world, I think, greatest architects, which will be participating, and so on. So I do agree, it will be a different Ukraine yes, considering the price, but still in a good way different.
Yeah. It's the price. It's terrible, but it will be a good future. Tell me about your drone program.
Oh, yes, this is actually wonderful. I would have never thought again a year ago that I would be fundraising for drones. It's like I was completely I loved flying drone. I had one, but then basically when the war started, we understood that Ukrainians need eyes in the sky, and all kind of eyes. So first, we fundraised actually for a military surveillance drone, which is very advanced and Estonian produced actually. But Ukrainians wanted especially to have these drones. They're like the wingspan is 5 meters. Just to imagine, they're really like professional, not the DJIs. So once over
5 meters. You said 5 meters? Wow.
Yeah. It's like a very professional surveillance drone with and it's so high basically that it cannot be spotted, it cannot be heard, and
Yeah.
Ukraine has now 20 of them. They're like 200,000 per piece, basically,
Yeah.
in euros or dollars, and none have been shot down. So they're like extremely professionals, and Estonians keep on like tuning it all the time, meaning that we receive intel from the ground and we like improve it. But then we understood that we cannot like forever crowdfund or fundraise for
Yeah.
these like Bayraktars or military drones.
Right.
So the Ukraine started one new campaign like donate your drone to Ukrainian army of drones, which means that many people have kind of their spare drone, which they loved flying or
Right.
don't use anymore. So now Ukraine has formed a new army of drones. It's
Right.
also Zelensky's initiative where people can send their drone to Ukraine. And we're doing it through Estonia. We guys that like, I don't know, my actually home is full of drones which haven't
Really?
been sent out. Yes, it's so amazing, like in a daily basis, some drones arrive. Here are like Mavics. Ukrainians
Yeah. The
appreciate.
DJI. Yeah.
Yeah, because they're light and
Yeah.
they can be like trained very easily, anyone to use.
Yeah.
So now the new basically let's say campaign is that please, if you have a spare drone, then find your closest collection point of army drones, or find me in LinkedIn, or please donate your drone so that Ukrainians can have a spare pair of eyes in the sky.
How can people find you?
If you could share maybe with your podcast my name. So typing my name in LinkedIn would be great. I answer always, especially when you mention drones. I'm 24/7 up and awake.
Spell well. So I had a DJI Mavic. Unfortunately, it's in the lake behind my house right now, so I can't send that one. But spell your name, because Yannicka Merlo is a hard. Americans don't know how to spell that. Yeah.
It's even hard for me to spell. Let me check, please. Jaananikmerilo.
Right.
Yannick Merilo. That's
Yannicka Merlo. And it's in the name of this podcast, so people can find you on LinkedIn and send drones there. It seems, if I was in the military, I think every small unit, every platoon should have a Mavic, just so they can see what's going on and bring it back. And that should be standard equipment for every small army platoon.
Exactly. And you can imagine how many platoons Ukraine has.
Yeah.
Meaning that the territory is really huge and they're being shot down and so on. So it's like we constantly need them.
More drones. Yeah. What else I'll just open the floor. Like, what do you want to tell the world? Like, are there websites people can go to? What is your message?
Yes, my message is basically that Ukraine is very much more than just war. Meaning that very often when we read the news, we read about the war. But Ukraine is absolutely like one of the, let's say, brightest countries in regards to, for example, technology. Many people probably don't know that like Ukraine has produced 10 unicorns, like the GitLab. Maybe the IT guys know and use the Git solution, like the Grammarly and so on. The
Grammarly is from Ukraine?
Yes, Grammarly is from Ukraine. It was born
every American high schooler thanks you.
Exactly. Yes, it's Ukrainian unicorn. Wow. And Ukraine has like 300,000 IT specialist pool, 300,000. And private space again, Firefly, the Alpha just took off successfully from Vandenberg. And it will be soon, I hope, competing with SpaceX for the orbital flights, low orbit, cargo and satellites. And it's been born in Ukraine, in Dnipro again, because one of the founders is from Zaporizhia, which is now under constant shelling again. Research center is in Dnipro. So what I would like people to know is that Ukraine is very much more than war. It's like very bright country. And now the digital solutions from Ukraine, like the country in a smartphone, I can use my public services in a smartphone, not depending what country I'm in. I can show my passport in a smartphone and so on. Ukraine has like launched very many new solutions, e-ticketing, e-health, like really health, meaning that have like digital prescription and so on. And it's like it will recover fast, and I
Yeah.
think it's really value adding country that you will also benefit from the brightest minds and solutions created in Ukraine.
That you should be the minister of, I don't know, economics or, marketing for Ukraine. That's an amazing story. I think the future is very bright. I think 2023 is very dark until the war is won. And I think 2024 and 5 and 2030 and 2040 are going to be much, much brighter. Hopefully as soon as possible. And Yannicka, thank you so much for this interview. It was incredible. It really helps bring things home that we just don't understand in America, because you can't understand being attacked by Russia unless you live there. And I really appreciate your time, and look forward to doing business with Ukrainian IT and space and all kinds of other things.
My sincere thank you. You have such a, I don't know, in-depth knowledge about the like all the Baltics and Poland. I'm absolutely impressed, and my true respect to you. Thank you, Terry.
When I was in 8th grade, like a teenager, they said, it was career day. What do you want to do when you grow up? And I said, I want to be Secretary of State. So I love foreign affairs, and I got to be astronaut. That was pretty cool too. But I really like it. But
I'm sure I'm sure many secretaries of state would be rather astronauts.
It's a lot less headaches, probably. Yeah. Well, thank you, Yannick. I really appreciate it. And again, for the podcast, if you love Down to Earth with Terry Virts, please subscribe and give us a rating.